Hello Internet, Rob from A Minor Error. Today I'd just like to share with you guys the process I go through for creating a big, soaring kind of lead guitar tone. You know, in the vein of sort of, John Petrucci, Steve Vai, that kind of a huge soaring lead. Firstly, I've been using basically all software plugins for all of my records and productions for basically the last year and a half. I have a good tube amp. I played a Mesa Boogie tri-axis rig with the Simul 290 power amp for literally, oh my God, it's almost 20 years I've had the rig now. And I love the tone. I still kind of prefer a tube amp, although software and modelers are basically there at this point. There's just a flexibility here that you don't get with using an actual tube amp, especially if you're self-producing and kind of learning how to do this recording thing to put out your own music. You're not going to know the decisions you need to make in especially the miking stage to get a tone that's going to work in the song until you've gone through that process. I just find this is where software is just far superior in that, especially if you're doing it on your own and you're learning, and really everyone is learning, whether you're Nolly or Chris Lord-Alge, everybody is learning on the job in one way or another. Even if you've gone to music school or you've studied and all the technical aspects, everybody's mix is going to suck in the beginning in year one when they get started versus year 10. That's just going to happen, You're just not going to know until you've gone through the process, and this is where a software just makes life so easy. So, when you're in the tracking stage, you can, put together some sort of a EQ curve that, okay, that sounds fine for now, but, once you get the whole thing put together and you can hear it with the keyboards and the drums and the vocals and the bass, maybe that decision that sounded great early on with a certain mic combination or a certain cab, or even, with software, I can change total heads and I can hop around like that and then hear it in the full context. You're just going to be able to make better decisions and then change things quicker and easier. So the first thing that I go through, for my leads, I almost exclusively use the Plini, Archetype Plini plugin. I just love the results that I get with it, and it's the one that I like. The very first thing that I would recommend doing is, picking a head that makes sense. The black head is awesome for leads, although the white head is great as well. I happen to be using the black one here. And then start to tinker with the mic placement on the cab. This, to me, is the most important step. If you make a mistake here, or if you mangle the tone in some kind of a way that isn't working on the mix, there's not really a way to EQ it till it sounds right. There just isn't. If you've reamped and you can't go back and do it again, then, you got to do what you got to do, and that's fine. But ultimately, I think, it'll always kind of suffer slightly like that. So the process I go through is always first get a tone that I like with the different microphones that I think is working well with the guitar, with the song, whatever it might be. Then we move on to the EQ stage. The very first thing you need to do with your guitar tones is you need to do a high pass and a low pass filter. Basically, there's nothing that the guitar is offering in a mix that you want really below 100 hertz and above 8K. Just automatically, the very first thing you should be doing is adding a high pass and a low pass filter. It's going to get rid of that fizzle up top and any super low end junk that's just going to get in the way of the kick drum and the bass. You don't need it and you don't want it. So what I'll do is I will basically hit play with this tone, and I will just turn on the high and low pass filter so you can hear what that is doing. So it's just kind of corralling those frequencies. It's getting rid of that super low-end junk. If you're not listening with headphones or good studio speakers, you're probably not going to really be able to hear the difference. In fact, you won't be able to hear the difference down here in the low frequencies if you're listening on like an iPad or an iPhone speaker. The next part is we need to get in here and we need to start to notch out some problematic frequencies. This, for me, is the most time-consuming part because you don't want to get too carried away and cut too much, because then you're going to remove the body and the overall essence of that guitar tone that we've taken the time to dial in whatever we thought sounded good really beginning here. You know, your EQ curve begins here with your mic placement, your mic choice, and your mic placement on the cab. Then all we're trying to do is just corral that tone in this process so that it plays well with the other instruments. So with these two cuts, usually I find that the lower frequency is going to be down around 3K-ish, somewhere in there. This one happens to be 3.5. Between 3 and 4 is the lower one, and then the higher one is usually somewhere between 5 and 6. And I think this one is around, it's at 6. I've been using just the neural stuff so much that they all seem to be those frequencies that I don't like, that I personally, in my taste, like to remove, tend to be around there. That's sort of my go-to spot. So what I'll do is hit play again, and I'll pop these on and off so you can hear what they're really doing to help kind of corral and focus that tone. Especially this one up here, I'm just like hearing this really irritating frequency that I just think, needs to go. It needs to be gone. So if you look at if I turn on the curve part, you can see what the EQ curve here is basically doing. Keep in mind with these cuts, you want to keep the Q or the width pretty steep. I use the Eosis Air EQ for almost all my EQing. This is like my go-to EQ. I absolutely love the way this one sounds. But you don't need to, use this one. Any EQ will work on the rhythm guitars. I happen to be using just the stock Digital Performer EQ, which will work as well. I'm sure no one watching this has DP. So, you can use your stock, if you're in Pro Tools, use the stock EQ. That'll work too. You don't have to go out and get some fancy EQ to do this. I happen to just prefer Eosis. I don't know. I just feel like I get results that I like with it. So that is step number 2. From there, what I like to do is then, and this might seem a little counterintuitive, but basically add a little bit of some frequencies back that we're kind of losing. So we want to cut that top end, and we want to, cut those frequencies, but then we're sort of losing a little bit of the presence and a little bit of top end. So I'm pushing the top end actually harder than I would have even realized, 4 dB of 15K. So what I'll do is I'll turn these off. I do the Slate Digital thing. I think Slate stuff is incredible, and it's only $15 a month. You cannot go wrong. This FGN is really, really potent. A little teeny bit will go a long way, and I'm basically adding in a little bit of the presence that we lost by those cuts. What am I at? 3K. And then for the top end, I'm all the way up here at 15K, and I'm boosting quite a bit, almost 4 dB of the top end. So I'll hit play again, and I'll kick on the FGN and then the custom series, and hear what that's kind of doing. So that's what both of those are doing. This one really kind of warms up the tone a lot in a way that I like. The FGN is such a powerful EQ. It just has so much color to it. I just absolutely love it. And this one, is really just bringing up, a bit more of the pick attack to me. A little bit more of that like top end, especially on those notes with like wide vibrato, kind of making the guitar scream again a little bit, that we sort of lost in those EQ cuts. A lot of times music production is going to be this counterintuitive, cut in one spot, but then kind of like boost in the exact same spot, which I know doesn't really seem to make sense. But, you'll see if I hit play again and turn these off and then turn them back on, they're not the same. It makes an enormous difference. There's a huge difference there. The other thing that I would say is that these kind of moves is something that I would never do in isolation like this with it in solo mode. I'm just doing that now for the sake of just kind of showing what I'm doing. This is something I would always do with the entire mix going, so you can hear you know exactly how the guitar is balancing against the bass and the drums and the keyboards and maybe vocals if they're in there. I only do instrumental music right now, so I don't have to worry about vocals. You know, certain of these processes you should go through in solo, like when I'm doing these kind of moves, trying to hunt and find those frequencies. That's where this is done in solo. You know, trying to set these mic placements I would do in like a combination of solo and kind of hearing it with the drums in there, but never something like this should always really be done, because this is like the color. We're trying to add something back to the guitar tone that fits the mix is my goal. So that would be my advice in this part. From there is something else that I've more recently begun doing, that I've always done on the rhythm guitar. So a rhythm guitar trick is to use a dynamic EQ to clamp down on the palm muting to help control those frequencies when you hit palm muting. I love to use palm muting in all aspects of my playing, not just rhythm, but also a lot in leads, especially if you're doing a fast run. To me, it helps build that energy and that excitement. So what I like to do is I tend to set, it's almost kind of universal, around 200, I like to add a little bit of a dynamic EQ. So a dynamic EQ is an equalizer that only kicks in when frequencies cross a specific threshold or a specific point that you've chosen. So it's basically like setting a compressor. You set the threshold level to take into effect anytime that it crosses that frequency. And then you got like, it's, you know, all of your different compressor, regular kind of compressor sets. So it's a compressor paired with an EQ. And I'll start with this off and then I'll pop it on. I'll go back to the beginning because I got that run in the very beginning that's kind of palm muted, and I think it makes a big difference. You know, the other thing that this is doing that I like personally is when I play maybe a legato run that's down lower, you can potentially get a buildup of those same frequencies, and it will clamp down just ever so slightly to help kind of focus that tone. What's cool about this is that when I'm playing on notes that don't have the buildup of that frequency, you still get that frequency. In other words, you're getting kind of the best of both worlds. It's, you know, not a static just picture planted on top of the tone the way an EQ is, the way EQ doesn't change. You know, the way this EQ doesn't change, it's fixed, that always affects it. This is only affecting it when we have frequencies that are causing a problem. So what I would not recommend you doing is grabbing an EQ and like getting in there and basically carving out this frequency all the time, because then you're going to lose the body of it. You're going to never have those frequencies, which we do want sometimes. It's just specifically mostly palm mutes, but I've been kind of finding with my legato lines, sometimes if I'm down lower, you'll get that same sort of buildup, and this will really help make a big difference. So like my new song, Cauldron of Stars, the very first guitar solo, I was having a really hard time getting it to mix where it wouldn't clip the limiter and causing all these problems. And that's when I thought, you know, just, you know, already doing this move on the rhythm guitars, maybe this would make sense on the leads. And then sure enough, that was the thing that it was really missing to be able to get the same level out of the limiter. Basically, there, you know, was this low legato line that was beginning in that solo. It was causing problems, and this was the way of taming it and controlling it specifically in that part. The last thing that I'm doing here is something more new. This is a plugin that I just got. It's called Soothe. And basically the idea with Soothe is it's basically like another dynamic EQ, but more designed to be doing those notchy EQ moves, getting in there and basically carving them out when you've got those problem frequencies. Now, Soothe can do a whole lot. It can do a whole lot more than even what I'm doing with it here. I'm using it in that kind of way, but you actually don't necessarily need to use it in that way. You can make it more subtle. So that's the way that I happen to be using it, and it's really subtle. I do think I like it, but this plugin's kind of expensive, so you don't need to go out and spend the money to buy this necessarily in order to get a good guitar tone. This is brand new for me. So, you know, I'll hit play again. I'll basically start with it off, and then I'll pop it on, and I'll play around with the depth control so you can really see what that's doing. So I find this to be pretty subtle. It's not as in your face as these other things are. The dynamic EQ might actually seem kind of subtle since I'm not playing in the full context of the mix. I would, but my computer doesn't really want to cooperate for whatever reason. I guess I could pop the drums on and at least hear this solo with the drums in there. So that's the process I go through for kind of fine-tuning that tone, getting it to sound the way that I think works great in a mix. The next step with creating a big lead is reverb and delays. So one thing that I really like to do is a trick that I picked up, I think in a Chris Lord Algae production video, where he sends off to a very short delay that I call pitchy. For my delays, I use repeater for everything. This is part of the Slate Digital bundle. I think it sounds amazing. So pitchy, I have it set to different durations in the left and right channels, and I've got the spread set to maximum. And the idea with pitchy, he was using it really on a lead vocal, and I decided that I like the way it works on my guitar tracks and on my leads. This is kind of my own thing. I don't know if really all that many other people do it, but it basically adds width. It's just trying to get width. I try to set it pretty subtle so that it's not over the top, but it adds a little bit of width to it. So it's just a subtle kind of width expansion. This is a mono track, even though it looks like stereo. It's really just a mono track, and it's just kind of adding a little bit of that width. The next step would be some sort of a delay. Now, you could experiment with different delay times, especially if you're doing like a longer delay throw, like a half-note delay throw might make sense. I have a half-note send set up. I just happen to not be using it. In this case, a quarter-note delay was the correct kind of length for me. And my quarter delay, I've got it with again with repeater, wide on the spread, and with the analog turned on so that those repeat signs are a little bit like kind of darker. So that's already starting to sound more interesting to me. It's sounding a little crazier. I think it fits the vibe for this track. Obviously the amount that you're sending to it, you can play around with. You can experiment setting up like a ducker so that, when you do like a fast run, those delay repeats don't potentially, cloud them or get in the way. I tend to like my leads maybe a little too wet with maybe a little too much delay, especially when we get to the reverb. I probably like too much reverb as well. It's, I don't know, just the way I like it. One trick, like when you're setting delay levels, is just to like play the track and then stop it so you can hear it kind of ping back. That's a thing that I like to do, just to, where am I really at? Also when you're sending things or setting levels, a trick that I picked up from another one in the Slate Academy, although I can't remember the guy's name now, is basically sweeping anything in its full range. Instead of just like a little move like that, sweep it really big, sweep it really low, like really try to hear the differences there. And you can hear the ping at the end. To me, around something like that, I think works great. The next step for me is a ambience, which is like a short delay or a short reverb. It's kind of doing the same thing as pitchy as far as trying to get a little bit more width, but it is definitely a reverb and not a delay. So I'll just kind of solo that so you can hear just that one effect on its own. So it's a slight, sense of space. For the ambience one, I am using the Verb Suites Classics, which is part of the Slate bundle. This is, a delay or a reverb send that I modeled after a Chris Lord Algae reverb, basically, and was kind of copying the things that he was going through. You know, and remember, anytime you're setting up a send like this, you can also shape the tone more. And this is a big part too of like really kind of creating a space that works in a particular mix that I'm definitely still like learning and developing. Actually, I just realized I happen to have my tape machines turned off over here. Whoops. The tape machine is so important. Honestly, the tape machine is like the most important plugin that you can get to really radically improve your mixes. It will just quantum leap everything forward. It doesn't have to be the Slate one. I happen to like that because it comes with the bundle. Any tape machine is going to work great. This is just so important. I cannot underestimate, you know, just how important it is. And then the cool thing is, you know, I'm using it on the different delays. So you're basically, or reverb sends, you're basically making it sound like these reverbs have been sent to a tape, which is going to warm them up, going to be that analog kind of goodness. So that is the Ambience send. And then the last one is a big old plate. And this is where I'm probably going just way too much reverb, but I don't know. I just like it. I think it sounds cool. And for that plate, I'm using the lustrous plates from Slate Digital. I love this plugin. I think it sounds absolutely incredible. It's, you know, just like everything you want in a great sounding, you know, kind of reverb or great sounding plate. And lastly, I'll play it with them all on, and then I'll turn them all off. So that's the process I go through for creating, you know, a big soaring kind of a lead tone. That's, you know, like I said, it might be a little too wet for some people's tastes, you know, too much reverb, too much delay. That's fine. You know, everything is you know, mixing is about personal preference and making subjective judgment calls about what you think works. And I think over time you learn what is actually working and what isn't actually working, and then your tastes change as well, you know, with what things that you like. The only other thing that I would say too is that, you know, if we go back to the EQ process especially, this is one where, you know, I will try it 4 or 5 times and I'll save it. You know, I've got, you know, a whole bunch of different, you know, leads that I've made in the past that I save, and I'll basically pop them on and off and try different ones and experiment that way. You know, because these EQ moves really radically change the sound, and because how you have your cab set really potentially really radically changes the sound, I think there is a degree of sort of experimentation, and especially when I'm doing like a real release and not like this is just a demo I made for this Legator guitar, which I don't even really like the guitar very much. I don't think it sounds very good. You know, I go through the most amount of tinkering there when I'm doing, you know, an actual like a AME record, you know, as far as trying to find a tone that works. And there's a lot of stuff just getting thrown out and starting over again, you know, from scratch. I think there's a lot to be said there from, you know, if something isn't working, stop trying to EQ it into working. Just throw it out, start over again. Throw it out, start over again, and save them so that you can then do a quick, you know, kind of shootout. So I recently did a review of the Archetype Gaugira plugin for a review on a Jericho guitar. You know, I made 4 different leads and 2 different rhythms, and then 2 different of these sort of intro octave part. And basically what I would do is, once I had the mix pretty much there, basically pop in number 1 on the rhythm guitar and then number 2 and hear, what is each one doing? Do I like it? Do I need to make another one? Try to not get too, if possible, committed to a specific sort of sound. I think a mix is about balancing everything together. Unfortunately, my computer's not cooperating, so I can't play the bass and everything in it. I wish I could right now, but too many plugins running, I guess. But it's about making decisions with the whole picture in mind and tweaking them from there. That's the process I go through for making a big lead sound. I hope you guys got something out of that, maybe a couple tricks that you can experiment. Let me know down below in the comments what you think. Any advice too as well that might love some input and some feedback.